Edward backed down onto his coaches at the big station next to Gordon. "You honestly have forgotten that accident, haven't you?" he asked. "What accident?" Gordon sniffed. "The one I just told Beyer about. Have you honestly forgotten that look on their faces, begging for forgiveness but knowing it was all too late? You claim to be better than them, but by the way you've been treating Beyer, you've just been worse." "Huh, I wouldn't expect a little engine like you to understand, Edward. Just keep your funnel out of the business of a big, important engine like myself," sniffed Gordon as he puffed away. He had a smooth and pleasant run. The rails were easy to grip, the signals were green, and the night was clear with a full moon. It looked a beautiful night to go flying along the line, he thought. Then he saw something that made him remember what Edward and Beyer had called him. As he thundered over a level crossing, he saw a car off the road and engulfed in flames. The car was nearly a burnt-out shell. As Gordon passed, he could have sworn he heard quiet, dying sobs coming from the car. Sobs of self-pitying despair. Desperation for the end not come so soon. He suddenly remembered Edward's words. "Have you honestly forgotten that look on their faces, begging for forgiveness but knowing it was all too late?" Images flashed in his mind of that same fateful accident. He hadn't really forgotten. He had, in all his self-importance, simply rejected the memory. After all, he had seen the looks on 98462 and 87546 and did not like to speak of such things, knowing how close he, on that occasion, had come to death himself. Then he thought of Beyer. The B-12's tearful statement came back into his mind. "I hope you get what's coming to you!" This and Edward's words floated around his smoke box. Beyer was a B-12, as was 98462, and yet... Gordon remembered everything he had said to Beyer. Not once had he said anything that suggested respect for the B-12, be it personally or with regards to how he pulled his trains. Suddenly, Gordon began to feel guilty. He wondered whether or not Beyer was truly like 98462 after all. A few days later, Beyer was due to leave the railway for his overhaul. To celebrate his departure from Sodor, he was to run a rail tour to Barrow-in-Furness, which was due to arrive a few minutes after Gordon's express reached there, and a few minutes before Thomas arrived on his way home to his branch line. His driver woke him up one morning, excited to tell him the news. Beyer grinned. "A rail tour," he beamed. "With pleasure I'll pull it." "Well, we'd better get you ready then," smiled the driver. Beyer was polished until he shone in the daylight, and a special headboard named the Northern Flyer, made for the occasion, was placed on his forehead below his funnel. The other engines were in awe of his appearance, even James, who was green with envy. He wanted to pull a train looking that spotless and wearing a headboard like that at the same time. He hoped it would make him the grandest engine in the world. "Come on, Beyer, time for your first train," called his driver. Beyer backed onto his coaches at Tidmouth Station. The Fat Controller was there, as were representatives of the North Yorkshire Moors Railway. "Do your best, Beyer," he said. "Today is your last day on my railway, so make it count." "Thank you, sir. I will, sir," Beyer grinned. He then saw Gordon on the other platform. Gordon hastily looked away. The Fat Controller noticed this. He had been informed about Gordon's attitude towards Beyer, but had noticed something that suggested guilt within Gordon. He decided to talk to Gordon when the time felt right. Soon, the guard's whistle sounded and the train was away. With much clanking and hissing, Beyer slowly brought the heavy train into motion. It was a cold day and heavy snow was falling, making the rails slippery, so the driver had to turn on the sanding gear to help the train grip the rails, but they were soon speeding through the snow-covered countryside. A few minutes after Beyer left, Gordon pulled out of Tidmouth too with his express. It was scheduled to depart after the rail tour had, giving Beyer time to clear the lines for Gordon. He was still deep in thought about Beyer, and almost didn't notice the guard's whistle as a result. One thing was for certain. He didn't notice a leak in his own vacuum pipes as he neared Barrow-in-Furness that evening, and that his brakes were slowly leaking on as a result. He gently pulled into the station and stopped, so his passengers could alight for a specially arranged service. Normally, Pip and Emma would carry on past the station and terminate at London, but since they were being overhauled, Gordon was to take their express as far as Barrow, where the passengers were changed for an electric multiple-unit passenger service. Soon it was time to leave. The guard had just put his whistle in his mouth when there came a commotion at one end of the platform. The station master ran up to Gordon's cab. "Bad weather has caused a power failure along the EMU's line," he explained. "As a result, a passenger train is stranded outside Barrow. I've made arrangements with the signalman and the Fat Controller for a steam engine to take the passengers. Can you drive Gordon onto the other line to collect them?" "Oh, of course we will," agreed the driver. "We'll show those EMUs just what a Sudrian steam engine can do," chuckled Gordon in response. But when his driver opened the regulator, nothing happened. He tried again. Still nothing. Disappointed, he and the fireman looked Gordon all over. They came back looking grim. "Your vacuum brakes are jammed, Gordon. Looks like you won't be going anywhere else today." "But what about the passengers?" asked Gordon. "I don't know, boy. I honestly don't know," replied his driver sadly. Just then, Gordon heard two familiar whistles. Thomas puffed into the station light engine, returning from the North Norfolk Railway on a different line to the one belonging to the failed engine, waiting for Gordon to clear the lines. He had not seen the problem at hand and was not strong enough to pull the broken down train if he did anyway. Beyer pulled in next to Gordon, returning to his railway. Gordon was relieved to see them both and quickly explained the problem. "So you insult me all the time I've been on Sodor, and now you're asking me for help?" Beyer demanded. "Is that true, Gordon?" came a familiar voice. The Fat Controller had been on the train escorting the North Norfolk Railway representatives to Barrow, and had been informed by Beyer's driver about what had happened between the two engines. Gordon gulped. Yes, sir," he replied meekly. Beyer saw this and spoke up. "Excuse me, sir, but I think we may count his brake failure as sufficient punishment," he said. "I also believe we have more pressing matters at hand. Might I suggest that Thomas take some of Gordon's coaches back with him to Tidmouth, making a slight detour, as it were, away from Farquhar, and that another engine take the rest of the train on? We may be delaying too many passengers otherwise." The Fat Controller pondered. "Very well, Beyer. Gordon, let this be a lesson to you about wrongly suspecting other engines just because they look like someone who wronged you." He walked away to make the arrangements. Thomas ran round to the end of the train, where the rear two coaches had been uncoupled. "Beep, beep! Passengers who are elderly, disabled, or have very young children with them first, please," he whistled, looking at the passengers. Most of the older passengers grumbled amongst themselves, but the youngest of the children didn't mind the change in plans, especially when they saw who was pulling them. Then he looked at Gordon. "First your safety valves, then your dome, now your vacuum brakes. What sort of damage will you do to yourselves next, Gordon?" Gordon reached steam crossly, then quickly looked over to Beyer's line. He had opened his mouth to apologize, but Beyer was already outside the station, switching onto the other line, ready to rescue the stricken passengers. "How long are we to be stranded here? It's freezing!" exclaimed the EMU as it sat alone on the main line into Barrow. "Hopefully not too long now, boy. Another engine is due to come and collect the passengers, and then hopefully someone will be here to rescue us," replied the driver. "Oh, fancy. The passengers get to go first instead of me. Why can't I be rescued too?" the EMU grumbled. "Sorry, boy. The engine coming through is supposed to be a rail tour, and has already delayed his passengers to help out. He doesn't have time to shunt you into the sidings. Anyway, passengers must get through on a railway." The EMU growled and muttered something rude about rail tour trains and scrap heaps. Presently, they heard a whistle. The EMU's face made a grimace. "Of all things, it had to be a kettle," he groaned, as Beyer puffed into view, passenger coaches trailing behind him. Beyer stopped with a sigh of relief emanating from the passengers who made their way towards him. "Hey, Tin Can, what are you doing on a railway line? Shouldn't you be on the scrap line?" shouted the EMU. Beyer let off a furious whoosh of steam. This blinded some of the passengers who, when they had found their way into the coaches, subsequently discovered they were on board a steam train when they were being sold souvenirs in support of Beyer's upcoming overhaul. The cloud of steam only vanished when Beyer puffed away. "That'll teach you not to say such things about steam engines," he retorted crossly, just as Diesel, who was currently working at a nearby industrial area, arrived to take the failed EMU home. Beyer pulled into the station. Angry passengers swarmed around the station master until the Fat Controller told them about what had happened. Then they swarmed around Beyer, but instead of being cross with him, they wanted to have pictures taken of him. They were so grateful. They even wanted to buy souvenirs of him, so many, in fact, that there wasn't enough to go around. The guards tactfully shooed the passengers into the remaining coaches for Henry, who had arrived to take the rest of the express home. He called out a congratulations to Beyer on his heroic rescue. "I remember doing something myself like that a long time ago with 2 failed diesels," he called. "I guess we're both enterprising now. I'm sorry about how I treated you, Beyer. Goodbye and good luck." And he roared out of the station. Beyer was overdue with his rail tour, but Gordon knew now was the time to speak. "Beyer, I'm... He looked apologetic. Beyer laughed. "You don't need to worry, Gordon. I've forgiven you. After Edward told me about 98462 and 87546, I understand why you felt that way. Personally, I don't entirely blame you for holding a grudge like that, especially after their deaths." Gordon looked relieved. "However," Beyer continued seriously, "I would advise you against ever making judgments like that again. I heard that James once did the same thing with diesels, and he got into a right pickle as a result. Just remember, no 2 engines are exactly the same." "Except for Bill and Ben with all their pranks," laughed Gordon. The 2 engines chuckled together until it was time for Beyer to leave. Beyer still lives at the North Norfolk Railway. His overhaul is nearly complete, and he looks forward to be back in steam soon to haul passenger trains and most of all to visit the North Western Railway again. The engines there look forward to this also. They, especially Gordon, now acknowledge that the only similarity between him and 98462 is their design, and that one major difference between them is that while 98462 was a menace to all engines, Beyer is in their hearts an engine worthy of being part of the Fat Controller's railway.